Welcome, everyone, to our regular weekday morning podcast on Kabbalah for Heretics, in which we have, for, believe it or not, the past 30 years, every weekday morning, for almost 30 years, with some few exceptions, but every weekday morning, regular as clockwork, pretty much. We've been going through the Zohar systematically, volume by volume, page by page, sentence by sentence. Welcome. If you're new to this, fortunately, most of these lectures have been recorded, and you can, in fact, listen to them to catch up. In the meantime, in this process that we've been going through, we have finished cover to cover volumes 1, 2, and 3, and are very, very close to finishing volume 4. And of course, when we do, we will, God willing, proceed to volume 5. There are 4 more pages left in volume 4 for us to cover. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but those of you who have been with us for some time know that we go fully and thoroughly and deeply. So 4 pages, a month, or maybe less, but a month at least. But here we are. The young boy that has been following the 2 great rabbis and has interjected himself in their discussion, to their amazement, he is a tzaddik. I mean, and a figure that we see in various forms throughout the Zohar, the hidden tzaddik. The hidden tzaddik is an important archetypal figure in the Zohar and in life. The hidden tzaddik is one who has all of this inner knowledge transmitted by God and his teachers, but does not appear to. He appears in every way to be an ignoramus, to be a fool, and people just avoid and ignore him. Yet he is a great, great tzaddik, placed by God in their midst to test whether they are capable of seeing that. The Baal Shem Tov, the great Baal Shem Tov, the Besht, Israel ben Eliezer, in the 18th century, the founder of modern Hasidism, mystical Hasidism, was considered such an embarrassment, was considered such an idiot, an ignoramus. And they gave him work escorting the children to school. And he was looked upon truly as a fool and an ignoramus. Of course, he was the Baal Shem Tov. And, of course, if the people had not been judging on appearances alone, which is what they do even now, they would have realized who he was, but they did not. And to tell you a story about the Baal Shem Tov, the chief rabbi of the town had a daughter, and she fell in love with the Baal Shem Tov. She saw, and she asked her father's permission to marry him, and her father absolutely refused. Finally, they bargained with the father, and he said he would allow them to get married if they lived on this little rundown farm he would buy for them, way out of town, so they would be out of sight and not an embarrassment daily to the father. And that's what they did. And they lived in that little farm. The Baal Shem Tov made his living by gathering firewood and selling it. I guarantee you, none of you would have realized that he was, in fact, the Baal Shem Tov. No one did, except possibly his wife. His brother-in-law despised him. His wife's brother despised him. His wife's brother was a learned rabbi, taking after his own father. And every Friday afternoon, because Friday evening begins the Sabbath, that brother-in-law would come to the little farm on his horse and cart and beg his sister to leave the Baal Shem Tov and to follow him back home. And she refused, but he kept on doing it. As it happens, on one Friday, when he arrived, and right before Sabbath, he had enough time to get back home before Sabbath began, because you must not travel on the Sabbath. He, being a highly Orthodox rabbi in particular, would be conscious of that. One particular Friday, when he arrived, as started to depart, the axles broke on his cart. And he could not go back home, because even if he fixed them, Sabbath would have begun by the time he had finished fixing them. So the brother-in-law, who hated the Baal Shem Tov, who hated Israel ben Eliezer, and thought of him as a total ignoramus and an embarrassment, a shanda and a charpe, was forcing the Sabbath with his brother-in-law and sister. So they were seated at the Sabbath table, and of course the Baal Shem Tov, Israel ben Eliezer, did everything wrong. The blessing over wine and bread and all of that. He just did it wrong. And this was to the great consternation of his brother-in-law. Finally, the Israel ben Eliezer excused himself and left. What they did not know, and especially what the brother-in-law did not know, is that this Israel ben Eliezer, who was secretly the Baal Shem Tov, had on his property a little cave that you had to get down on your hands and knees to crawl into. And in that little cave, he kept in secret a white gown and a Torah scroll. And it was the Sabbath when he left them, and he went to his little cave, crawled hands and knees, put on the white robe, grabbed the Torah to his breast, and began dancing ecstatically in that cave. The brother-in-law, laying down on the couch in front of the fireplace, was trying to sleep. And at the same point that Israel ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov, was dancing ecstatically in the cave, a spark flew off from the fire onto the carpet and caused a fire. As the brother-in-law looked into the fire, he saw his brother-in-law, Israel ben Eliezer, dancing in flames, clutching the Torah to his breast. And at that moment, he knew who his brother-in-law was. And he went back to the town and spread the word that this man, whose name was Israel ben Eliezer, but who spiritually came to be called the Baal Shem Tov, the keeper of the good name. He spread the word of who this man really was. And followers began to come to him. It was an amazing time. It is that kind of hidden tzaddik that we see even now. And you see it particularly, as in this story, among the Orthodox. They discredit the person either because he knows too much and they're jealous and envious of it, which is rarely the case, or because he acts like an ignoramus. Israel ben Eliezer, before he was announced as the Baal Shem Tov, dressed like a Gentile, and he drank like a Gentile, and he saw, and he played cards with the Goyim in the tavern. Really. He was intentionally hiding his holiness. God tests us to see whether we recognize holiness or not. Whether it is the cover of the book that we are responding to, or the book itself, the content. And such hidden tzaddikim are that test. And the hidden tzaddik knows that, suffers it, the ridicule, the rejection, the condemnation. Even now, even today, there are hidden tzaddikim who the Orthodox attack and vilify and, in a sense, disregard. They regard him because they're always condemning him. But he goes on his way, praising God, relating to God, unifying God. Because that was the great message of the Baal Shem Tov, that we must unify God. God is in a state of disparity within itself. The left side and the right side of God are opposite each other. They're not connected any longer. They fell apart at the moment of creation, and man is given the task of mending that. Not by attending meetings. You know, we've talked in other podcasts about bringing light to the Gentile. That's what the Jew is commanded to do, to reunite Esau and Jacob. I must point out that that is not accomplished by committees on Jewish-Gentile relations. It's not accomplished by Jews and Gentiles sitting around in a circle talking about how much they have in common. That's not how it's done. And when it's attempted, it is so superficial that it is an offense to God. What we are talking is a private, individual, inner theurgy that we are commanded to perform virtually, literally, as our spiritual practice. So that the Jew who is speaking to a Gentile in a friendly way or whatever, inwardly is uniting with that Gentile. He's not telling the Gentile that. He's not saying, oh, brother, I am welcoming you into the community of Israel. He doesn't do that. That's proselytizing, not a religion. It's God. And when a sufficient critical mass of people are doing that, then Jew and Gentile shall be united as a single body in us and offered back up to God. You'll notice Paul says in Ephesians that that is exactly what Jesus did. He says, you Gentiles, he's addressing the Gentiles. He said, you Gentiles, because you're not Jews, have been without hope and without God. This is Paul, right in the New Testament. Ephesians. You have been without hope and without God because you are not Jews and part of the community of Israel. But this man, Jesus, has united Jew and Gentile in his own person, creating out of them a new man consecrated to God. All of you, we are becoming, because of the inner work being done, a new man. not because of any religion, but because of the theurgy that we are practicing inwardly. Well, I'm going to stop here for this morning. We'll continue tomorrow. In the meantime, our recording folks are here, so let me ask them, as I always do, if they have any comments or questions. And if they do, raise your hand. Yishai, go ahead. Remember, this is not a class. People are not invited to attend. It's a recording session for a podcast that is then broadcast on our YouTube channel. So don't feel you've got to come here. In fact, it's best if you don't. The only ones who are usually here are the people who are recording, editing, and broadcasting these podcasts. Go ahead, Yishai. There we go. Powerful podcast. Like the Baal Shem Tov, hidden tzaddiks appear ignorant intentionally. We are commanded to bring light onto the Gentiles inwardly in theurgy, not interfaith groups. Good. In our own persons. There, now we're getting some good comment. Go ahead. I think there's more, right? Worth waiting for. Okay, great. Well, it's a great comment. Worth waiting for. All right, now, as I do at the end of every podcast, I will recite the Kaddish, the prayer for the dead, in memory of the departed soul of our beloved friend and fellow Kohen, Leonard Cohen. Yiskadal v'yiskadash me'rabo, Bomo divro chirusei v'yamlich machusei, v'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei l'chol beis Yisrael, bagalo uvizman kore v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabo me'elo me'el mayo. Yisparach v'yiskabach v'yisomal, v'yisnasei v'yisada v'yisalei v'yisalal. Shmei dekutrio b'richu. Le'elo mincha b'richosa v'shirasa, tushmechasa v'nachamasa, damiron balmo v'imru amen. Yehei shlomo rabba min shemaya, v'chayinu aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mamov, hu ya'asei shalom, aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. Let everybody please say amen. Amen. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our podcast for this morning. God willing, I'll be here to give another podcast tomorrow morning where we will continue with where we've left off. In the meantime, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.